and 315 are black. That comes to about 13%. So a little bit higher than the state population of black Minnesota.
Jeff, what do those statistics mean to you as you're looking at this? And in the context of what's happening around the country, we know that the numbers from Chicago, from Milwaukee, from Detroit, from New York, New Orleans, St. Louis are particularly devastating to the African American community.
Yeah, so well, thanks again, you guys, for having me. We really appreciate it. Those are a good breakdown. I was looking at that dashboard again today. And so, what it says, first of all, is that we're not out of the woods. We don't believe that we've hit our peak or even our surge, and those numbers are still going up. We've had increased cases. I know you saw a lot of chatter about opening up Minnesota, and a whole bunch of people who stormed the governor's office. First of all, Minnesota, and a whole bunch of people who stormed the governor's office. First of all, for them to kind of storm the governor's residence. So we also noticed those folks weren't using any sort of social distance or protocol. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw even more of an increase even in that population.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, we had outbreaks in meatpacking plants over around the country, in particular Smithfield in South Dakota, which is closed down, and another one I think is called JBS in Worthington. What's notable about that is the meatpacking industry, um, if most people don't know, really has now consisted of people of color, either African immigrants or immigrants from Mexico primarily, or
Mm-hmm.
Latin America. And so when you see that virus growing in those places, even if they're in rural communities such as Worthington, or in states that don't have a lot of people of color, such as South Dakota, as the breakdown comes out, you'll see that that's going to grow the amount of people of color who get the disease. We are now kind of on a per capita basis about close to double. We're about 6.7, 6.8% of the population, and I think Harry said in his recap about 14%. So you got to look at it as kind of apples to apples. We're now double the amount of cases versus how many versus what we represent. So that means that it is growing in our community. And in the other cities, as you well know, that have larger African American communities, or that's where it started, it's exploded. It's exploded in New Orleans, in St. Bernard's, and St. John's Parish. It's exploded in Chicago. It's exploded in Milwaukee. It's exploded in St. Louis, New York, especially in the ethnic areas there. So we could expect to see the same, which is why we're working so diligently with yourself, Al, and others in a multicultural kind of setting to get this information out to multicultural communities, Black, Brown, Native, Latino. We're also working with community-based organizations that are delivering service information. But we have many of our churches. A shout out to, I shouldn't do one pastor, but I know Reverend McAfee has been leading a coalition
Mm-hmm.
of pastors, as well as Reverend Babington Johnson, working with the leaders of all of the big African American denominations to not only get the word out, but get resources such as food and meals into people's hands in a safe way so that they don't spread the disease. And then the other thing I'd really like to emphasize is this issue of asymptomatic carriers, because
Mm-hmm.
that goes to our young people.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting to get warm outside. We don't have our kids in school. We're not sure what the summer job situation is going to look like because we have shut down a lot of the parks and others to prevent the community spread. For our young people who will feel perfectly fine and are antsy, and I understand are going to want to get out and hang out and do something as opposed to being in the house. I think the thing we have to figure out is what do we do there? How do we have the conversation so that they don't congregate in a way that they spread the disease and then bring that home to their moms, dads, grandmas, Madeas, pops, paws, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that is something that we really need to think about.
Along those lines, Senator Hayden, we all are concerned and disturbed by the incidents of, I think, a party or some gathering here in North Minneapolis, a few blocks from where I live on Irving. and apparently a shooting. And so, two things that are egregious. One is that some people, I think young people, decided to gather even in a time when we all should be talking about maintaining social and physical distance. And the second thing was that we don't know what it was that led to this tragic shooting. I have not read it or heard it yet. And in any whatever it was, it's unfortunate, right? And what it says is that we're in an environment of heightened both insensitivity and anxiety created by the general atmosphere of uncertainty that COVID-19. So we need special communication, I believe, special attention to things that aggravate, things that are already exacerbated in our families and our communities and our lives. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the work that we want to do, it has to come from people who look like us, who talk our language, our dialect, and better yet, have a relationship with us to be able to start to figure out. And this is just going to heighten what we know has been going on about trauma and mental health and behavioral health and the things that people do to to try to alleviate their issues. So on one hand, I know we want to party, I know we want to have some fun, blow off some steam, but you could be, spreading it to your friends, and your friends can be asymptomatic. Let me tell you what I mean by asymptomatic. We
Yeah.
use these clinical terms. It simply means that you don't feel sick. Or if you do, maybe you got a headache, or maybe it just feels like something that you normally feel. So you don't think of it in terms of the coronavirus that you see on TV and people in the hospitals that got oxygen masks and ventilators. You just go about your life and think everything's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is, as a young person, you might be able to fight that off. You're relatively healthy and young, but the older we get, the more issues that we get. And so the very people that are taking care of you and that you love so dearly, you may be giving it to them. So we have to have some discipline about how we get together. We got to recognize that this is something that we can prevent. And then the second issue highlights an issue that's near and dear to my heart. Every one of our families, including my own, has been a victim or a survivor of gun violence. You guys know my sister Taylor was killed, I guess now almost 4 years ago, at the hands of an errant bullet meant for somebody else. They got her. She had nothing to do with it. Those bullets have no names. And
Mm-hmm.
so we know our dear brother Spike Moss, a longtime activist, civil rights activist, and someone who's worked on anti-violence initiatives his whole entire life. It's now he's touched his family. It's always touched his family because his family is our family, but it's now touched his family in the form of his grandson, which has been widely reported was the victim of the bullet in this party last weekend. We have to really think about how do we deal with those issues. And one of the things we're trying to do at the state, and we're encouraging our philanthropic partners, and then just people in general, irrespective to what you can do, is to try to find your children and find your family members and figure out how to do things that keep them out of harm's way. I know for me, I have a 23-year-old, I was 24 and 18, and my wife and us, it sounds kind of corny, but we played a couple board games. I
Mm-hmm.
can't tell you the last time, Al, I played a board game, right? But it allowed us to come together, allowed
Mm-hmm.
us to spend some of that time, and try to spend more time with each other and to try to connect again and figure out what are the things that we need to do. I know that that's not going to be always so, and not everybody has those trusting and caring mentors or those those physical locations to do it. But as much as possible, we really need to be able to intercede with our young people and let them know that this may be a long, bumpy road, but we want them to live through it, and we certainly don't want them to take each other's lives or to take their families' lives because they passed on the disease.
For our listeners and viewers, Senator Hayden, how do you guys do your job over at the state capitol? How do you practice social distancing and also manage the affairs of state in your convening?
Yeah, so what we do here in the Senate is we only allow a certain amount of people on the floor. We have enough room to fit all 67 senators, but on the floor, I think we only have a handful, maybe 12 or 14, and they're
Mm-hmm.
situated all throughout the Senate chamber to give us enough room from each other. The rest of the folks are sitting. I'm sitting in the office adjacent to the Senate, to the Senate now. We have people that sit in this room, and there's a TV monitor. I don't know if I can show you. I don't dare because I can't see you, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can see all of that. But there's a
Mm-hmm.
TV monitor, and we have rooms like this all throughout the Capitol where people come, have the proper amount of social distancing, and then if they want to speak, they can come to the microphone and speak. It'll get wiped down. If they want to, and then when it's time to vote, the people in the Senate chambers vote, finds a safe space to sit while each room gets called in so that they can vote. So one of the reasons why it took me a little while to get on today is that where a vote might used to take 3 minutes, it now takes 15 minutes to make sure. And then we also have members who have decided because of their underlying health care condition or maybe their age, they're not coming to the Capitol at all. So then they call into their prospective leader and let them know they watch this on TV. It's always shown, and then they let them know how they want to vote. So then the leaders then get up at the end of the vote and then go through the roster, and the members who aren't here, um, they then say how they want to vote.
Okay, complicated process, but necessitated by the need for social media, for social distancing. So, Harry, back to this whole question of the impact in our community. What are you discovering for either community groups, organizations, businesses? What are you hearing as you monitor social media about how we're being impacted locally and nationally?
Well, nationally, the numbers, we're getting a clearer picture because now even the CDC is starting to put out more numbers that deal with ethnicity, and the picture is daunting. And I think it's showing that nationally, I think 30% of the severe and serious cases are Black people. And when you once again extrapolate that out into our population of about 14% of the country, it's showing that we have a double propensity over our population. And so, and then there's, I guess, even further extrapolation that has to go into all of that saying as to how it's truly having devastating effects on Black people in cities throughout the nation. So that's what's being borne out. The numbers are being borne out. What's disconcerting and what people are hypothesizing now is Senator Hayden. You mentioned the protest that took place, I think, this past Friday at the governor's mansion, and they're happening in Maine and in Arizona and various other places, as you said, where a lot of times they're Democratic governors, and so and certainly they're starting to look like partisan Trump rallies. But what people are hypothesizing now is because the numbers are showing that the people most at risk for this disease are Black people, Brown people, Indigenous people, that the inherent racism of many is coming out saying that's why we want to let's open up the country. It's not us, and it's not them saying necessarily, oh, we hate X, Y, or Z. They're just saying, oh, we don't care. It's not us. Let us just go back and live our lives.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that ignorance, and that's what it is, because even though we disproportionately per capita have more, as you read the raw numbers, it's killing plenty of white people as well. We, because of the issue of what we call comorbidity, which really translates into saying that you have a one or more chronic illness associated in your life. So you may have high blood pressure and asthma, or you might have congestive, heart failure and lymphedema, or you may have diabetes and whatever, right? We just disproportionately, unfortunately, have comorbidity. So when we get the disease, it's particularly lethal with us. And so that's what you see. However, the disease is lethal in of itself. I think you saw Andrew Cuomo, Chris Cuomo, the CNN person, this the other woman who they're writing about it, telling you how not only hard and they've kind of got to the other side, but how much suffering they went through to get it. So even if it doesn't kill you,
Mhm.
It is a lot of suffering that goes on, with this issue. And if you end up in the hospital, in the ICU, on a respirator, you're going to have some long-term damage, and that doesn't discriminate. The numbers for us are just larger because we have this comorbidity or these pre-existing conditions. And so I think anybody who thinks that somehow that this disease only affects Black and brown people, though it does disproportionately, is fooling itself. It hits plenty and plenty of white people. As a matter of fact, and I know that people think that it's only old people, but the Strib had an article this week about a guy who from I don't know where it's from, somewhere in St. Cloud, I guess, or I don't know, Anoka somewhere. But I don't mean to make light of it, but he was a triathlete and he went through it and it was devastating to him. And he's come out on the other side, but he can barely walk now. He used to do 26-mile marathons and 100-mile bike rides and swim and all this stuff, and he can barely do a half a mile on the treadmill and doesn't know what the lasting impacts are going to be on him. And this is a white young athlete in his 30s. So I would just continue to tell people that don't be careful with social media.
Mhm.
Go directly to the CDC, NPH's, World Health Organization's websites. Listen to authentic news publications like yourself. But what we have found in a little bit of, not just a little bit of research, is that it is kind of right wing organizations that are using social media to drive people to that notion, Harry, that it doesn't bother them, or to say that, hey, let's open everything up, it'll be okay, and if somebody does get it, it won't be me. That is a false narrative. It's wrong, and I would just tell people, especially our white allies, to don't fall for that narrative. This disease does not discriminate. It just is particularly lethal to those who have underlying health care conditions, and that disproportionately is Black and brown and indigenous people.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is a special edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane. We're pleased to have as a guest State Senator Jeff Hayden, who represents South Minneapolis District 62, right, South Minneapolis, and who I believe you're deputy leader
I
um,
am. I am.
of the Senate. So thank you for your service and for what you're doing. Jeff, I want to close out by asking you to give us an update on the work that you're presently working on today at the legislature and an update on the governor's and your legislature's response to COVID-19. Are we finding the resources we need? Are they being deployed, reacting fast enough, and acting in the right places? What do you think?
Well, I will say I'm a little disappointed in the Senate today. I think the bills that we were able to get done, not that they're not important, on drug transparency, um, this issue of can 16 and 17-year-olds operate rides at Valley Fair and Paul Bunyan land, and some work that we've done on in-home family child care. Sure that they're important bills, especially the drug transparency, but they probably could have waited for us to focus more on issues related to COVID. We are working with the governor very closely to deploy more resources, i.e., money and resources in communities of color, working with organizations like yours and ethnic media all across the state, as well as nonprofit organizations that provide this service to include the faith community, to get more of those resources so that we can get these messages that we're giving today in all communities, especially the ones that are disproportionately affected. So that is the focus of my work each and every day, just really trying to focus on doing that work. We're also working awfully hard on unemployment resources, making sure people have that. There are a lot of sole proprietors
Mm-hmm.
in LLCs that we have not been able to figure out yet. So we're working really closely with the governor and Deed to try to get them the money that they need. We are also working on a package. I have supported a letter that Jeremiah Ellis and many of our local county and city councilors have put forward. I've kind of pushed that out there to make sure that we're hearing them about rent and kind of a rent holiday or a rent forgiveness or mortgage forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, we want to couple that with a rental assistance package so that we can then help people pay their rent. And part of that is to make sure that especially the small landlords and others who also have mortgages can make their
Right.
bills and things of that nature. The second thing is we don't want people to, when this is over and the crisis is over, to automatically get an eviction notice if they can't come up with a lump sum of money. But I will also say that the local and county governments need the property tax so that they can pay for the street sweeping and cleaning and snow plowing, fire, and even police and other things that they need to run a city and a county. So we're working really closely. We've had resistance from the Republicans to do a package that's comprehensive, and our caucus, along with the speaker and the governor, are working really hard on that. So we're trying to put all these things in at once. We're also trying to figure out what businesses that we can open that can be safe, that people can either recreate, or we can get some manufacturing jobs going again, or we can get some of those small businesses in our communities open. And the last thing I'll say is we have also been working broadly in the POCI community on microloans for very small businesses, things that you see in the Midtown Exchange or the Mercado, El Central, or the 24th Street Mall in my district, or Hmong Village in St. Paul, or the Carmel Mall that's in my district, that East Africans have smaller stalls. We really are working with my colleagues in my colleagues in the POCI caucus and United Black Legislative Caucus and getting those open or getting them some relief so that they don't lose their businesses. So my days are full, and I'm glad to be able to talk to you and let people know the things that we are doing. But those are the things that we're actively and currently working on.
Any questions, Harry?
I just wanted to follow up on something that you had mentioned to underscore and highlight the importance of what you said when we were talking about rent and mortgage holiday and things of that nature and unemployment insurance. Now, I can't recall off the top of my head what the numbers were before COVID-19, but last week I was on a governor's call and he said that the white unemployment rate was at 12%, and the black unemployment rate now in the state of Minnesota is at 26%. So 1 in 4 uh, black Minnesotans are out of work right now. And so that's once again highlighting the need for assistance.
Yeah, it speaks to our overrepresentation in the service industry and those types of jobs. And they're good jobs, and I don't want to, I mean, we are hardworking people, but those are the jobs that were kind of deemed non essential, if you will, and that are closed versus the other ones that are open. And then a lot of the companies that can take it offline and do just what we're doing on Zoom and other WebEx platforms to interact with each other. So yeah, our community is hit especially hard, and then our small businesses, small staff, sole proprietors. Right now, we don't have that. And I will mention that the undocumented community, which I have a lot of my district, also doesn't qualify for any federal program. So there's groups of people, including myself, working awfully hard to figure out how to deal with that issue. Those folks are living in our community and doing work and don't have any avenue of recourse during this time.
Yeah.
Any questions, Harry, or comments from any of the Facebook people that were following?
We just had several comments thanking us for putting on the conversation, and I'll just check one more time to see if there were any additional questions or comments.
And in the meantime, to those who are watching on Facebook, thank you for watching. Thank you for connecting. And we want you to feel engaged and empowered. Bring your voice, bring your concerns to these sessions. And thanks again, Senator Hayden. Harry?
Thank you so much. No, just comments saying, thanking us and thanking the senator for the work that he is doing.
Okay, then we'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, the simulcast of the regular 1 o'clock broadcast of Conversations with Al McFarlane at 1 o'clock on KFAI 90.3 FM. That being streamed live as well to Facebook, hopefully to other social media platforms simultaneously. Tomorrow's guest, among them anyway, is Commissioner Myron France, who runs the management and budget office for the state. And we'll be talking about where the money is and what the impact is of the shutdown of our state and how we, as a community, continue to navigate our interest as part of the equity owners of the state of Minnesota. Last comment, thank you for putting on your mask just to model what we have to do, Senator Hayden. But last comment is, how do we tell our people, Black people in Minnesota, people in the Black community, and you and I know the Black community isn't all Black. It's white people who choose to be in our community, who identify as members of the Black community. It's Native people, it's Asian people, it's Latino people. We all say that we are part of the Black community, and that's a positive. How do we continue to inform, invite, and motivate all of us to bring our voices to support you, your work, and our interest at the state level?
Good. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to take this off so that you can hear me, but I did want to show people that I was being responsible, and I want them to be this as well. These are, people are being creative, and local communities are figuring out ways in which we can, have these masks and sanitize them. I would just say that for us to pay attention. Thank you, Al, for this. Pay attention. We have a series. We are in an election cycle, and so I'm up for re-election along with the whole legislature. So I'm not just speaking of myself. So pay attention. If you are a voter, if you are a delegate, we're going to start voting in the Democratic Party this weekend, and I'd make sure that you were involved and that you got your ballot, and continue to support us over here as we continue to fight for you to get the resources in our community. That is where my focus, and I'll have to open this up to Senator Champion and Representative Moran and Representative Richardson, who's new, but it's phenomenal, Representative Noor, Representative Hassan, and others in the POCI caucus that are really fighting on the issues for our community, in particular the Black and Brown and African immigrant community, but also people of color as a whole. That is where our focus is. Our ability to get the work done, understand the process, and then push and push and push, and have the access to state leaders like myself, and then have a table like I'm sitting around today to be able to push those issues. I think is bearing fruit. I think not as fast as we want to, but I think that we're moving, slightly behind where the disease is, and we want to get ahead of that. But if you want us to be here, then you have to show up virtually, let us know, and then be able to support us.
Senator Hayden, thank you so much. And I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you tomorrow, 1 o'clock. We're here on KFAI and on Facebook. We'll see you. Take care. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Kelvin.